Well, Steve, welcome. Anyone who visits the Centre for Optimism knows what that first question is going to be. Steve, what makes you optimistic?
Oh, I think a lot of good examples through my past and history, but really the thing that makes me most optimistic is going out in the world, being able to succeed. Now, whether that's in work, which I did initially, and then in other areas, and having the world, despite all the negativity and its best attempt to tear you down, to be able to succeed and demonstrate that success is possible. And really, I think that's the driving force for optimism for everybody. I mean, it's a tough world. And I've got my share of horror stories from the early years, and I ran a business for 17 years. Being able to succeed and to demonstrate that to people is the absolute pinnacle of giving you a push forward and a step up. It really is, and I can't emphasize that enough. Don't wait for people to go out there and give you something. Going and building a future builds self-resilience, and it builds you an internal sense of self-worth. And then ultimately that can lead to a sense of optimism that you can make things better. And that is critical. And everybody I've met that's highly optimistic is always being able to say, well, these are the things I've done so far in life. I might not have achieved everything. They still plan to travel the world or fix the world. And particularly for in politics, we all plan generally to make the world a better place. And here's a little story, Victor. I take the view that probably half the people who get into politics, my current game, get in there to fix the world and make it better. And then what happens is the political system and the bureaucratic system slowly beats it out of them till they kind of fall out of politics, eventually very disillusioned at what they haven't been able to achieve and very angry about the whole process. But the good leaders and the true optimists are still going, despite the best attempts, I'm still here and I'm still making it work. And one of the secrets to this game is making sure that you have an appreciation for small victories, not big ones.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That notion that optimism is a state of mind, not the state of the world, and you absolutely nail that. So politics is a tough game. You've been in and out and elected, re-elected. What keeps you optimistic while playing politics?
So I think two things. The first is that I have an inner self-belief because I started a business from scratch. I built a business. I sold it. It was successful. And in other parts of life, in terms of other bits of leadership, I was able to be successful, and that gives me a real start. And then the second part of it is, particularly in politics, if you can focus on making the world a better place for a small number of people. So what are your greatest victories? I've spent a lot of time in opposition, Victor. So, I don't get to change the world in those circumstances. I don't bring in legislation that alters a million people's lives. But I get to help people still, and I have victories. I'm in there because I'm not bad at battling the bureaucracy. And occasionally we have wins. And some of my wins are quite simple. Getting a set of traffic lights or a lollipop person on a street, for example. I remember getting some extra assistance in a school for a highly autistic child. All of those things that make somebody's life significantly better. Now, if you can go through politics and have a whole pile of those and be happy with that, then that's the basis, and that's the stuff. That's where you need to be. And if you're lucky enough to be one of those few politicians that gets to change the world, fix the taxation system, fix the public service, fix the delivery of service to the community, well, you're one of the very rare lucky people. But if just trying to make the world as a better place is enough to drive you, then that's a really good starting point.
Yeah, and exactly, you've made the world better for that one person with special needs in education, the person who needed help with public housing, the people who needed the traffic light, and they couldn't have done it without you as the local member. So look, the Liberal Party took a bit of a flogging in the last election, and yet you remain optimistic for it. So tell us, what's your optimism for the Western Australian Liberal Party and Parliamentary Liberal Party?
So I think, Australians are sort of inherently when I say conservative, not necessarily right wing, but ultimately they tend to be in a pattern where they'll give you a go if you can demonstrate a degree of credibility. And I've been around long enough now to see, you know, the Labor Party and Liberal Party cycle through periods of opposition and government. And I know generally that if you can deliver a message that shows that you are present and credible, then I think people will listen. But I say this all the time, Victor. I think politics is tough but fairly simple. The role generally, particularly in opposition, is to be present. You have to be in the debates, in the arguments, and present in the community so that they can reach out and talk to you. And you also have to be credible. Now, there's this old saying, and I think it's generally true, that oppositions don't win government, governments lose government. But if you're not a credible opposition, you can't step up and take it when the government starts to look a bit doddery. We have to be credible. Those are the two things that I think drive politics. If we can deliver that, and it's not easy, because not only do you have to be credible, so you have to do the background work, you have to do the research. It's not easy. There's a lot of work involved. And then you have to be able to deliver the message. So, you know, find what the important message is, the issues that impact on people, and be able to deliver it in a way that the media will pick it up. And that's not easy. The media, in the 20 years I've been involved, the media has changed significantly. It's gone from very much let's educate the public on sort of both ends of an argument and let them decide, to a much more 24-hour media cycle driven sensationalist model, where modern media tends to tell you how to think rather than give you the information and let you think. And for someone like me, who's absolutely dedicated to having a more educated, more involved public when it comes to politics, that's an anathema. That's a problem. So I want to see politicians working to talk to the people, and to some degree tell the people how all these things work. I don't like the way that politics has been dumbed down, but I have to say that we the political group and political parties have been a part of that, and that's not good for the long-term governance of either the country or the state.
Yeah, I think Steven Pinker, the head of psychology at Harvard, has mapped the news, which was 50-50 good, bad in the 70s. It's now something like 95% bad news. But the opportunity to you as an opposition, of course, is all that social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. People are very open to those messages. So can I take you sort of now on a zoom out? What makes you optimistic for Western Australia and the world?
Oh, well, so in terms of Western Australia, not trying to belittle anybody in the eastern states, but my goodness, if you want to be anywhere in the world, whether it's during or after COVID or not, you want to be in Western Australia. We're a massive state by area. We have massive resources. We have a small, slowly growing population that it gets to take advantage of that. We're a third of the state of the country in terms of geographical area. We're 10% of the population. So you know, an area's ability to generate wealth for its people is, you know, the wealth has to be divided up. So we generate a lot of wealth, particularly through the mining sector, but also through agriculture and a number of others. And that wealth that's generated is distributed to a reasonably small number of people. Now, everybody in the eastern states, of course, gets a chance to get their cut because they can invest in companies. And if you have superannuation, I can almost guarantee that you have a number of shares in mining companies that make good money out of Western Australia. But look, in terms of the economy, this is the state to be in. Like everywhere, we can't get enough workers, so we have to build up on that. We have a bit of a boom-bust cycle, so I still want to see us be able to convert the mining booms into a more sort of stable economy going forward. That's one of my sort of grand visions for the future, to see other industries step up a bit as mining fluctuates, as it is always going to do. But this is the state. And look, I came here as a young man. I've been here 30-something years. You know, this is the state where you can do what I did: arrive with 3 suitcases and a couple of $100 in cash. A couple of years later, start a business, build a business, grow, get involved in leadership, and ultimately, as I am, become the leader of the opposition in the upper house and the shadow treasurer. This is a state that is still open for people to make their mark in the world. So look, it's incredibly hard to not be hugely optimistic about the state of Western Australia. I mean, debt levels are low. Government's making a fortune, and part of the job is to talk about exactly how much money the current Labor government's got, as the rest of the state has massive deficits. We've had two $6 billion surpluses in a row. The state government is even richer than everybody else over here at the moment. Victor, it's making an absolute fortune. So in terms of the state of Western Australia, it's a bit of a cheat, because it's very hard not to be very optimistic about the future over here. In terms of the world, it's a slightly different picture, I suppose, in the world, because there are far more headwinds in the world. There are, geopolitical issues. There are more severe financial issues. There's a lot of countries that probably look a little lost at the moment. I have a driving belief in human nature, that human nature is very good at ultimately finding a way. Take the critical issues, for example, like climate change. I'm absolutely confident that human abilities, human independence will deliver the technology to make a major fix. Now, it might take another 30 or 40 years, but I'm immensely optimistic that you'll get there. The best of human nature, I think, means that it always leaves the world in a very good place. The secret is probably not to get bogged down in the worst of human nature, the cultural identities, the repression that occurs in various areas. And I think part of that is about, if you don't get bogged down in that, you're less likely to get caught up in sort of the minority countercultures that don't make any more sense. So, at one end, you've got totalitarian states, and that's terrible. But at the other end, you've got people bogged down in conspiracy theories to the point that their mind doesn't function. And that's the other end of that. There's so much optimism in the middle if you can just find it and find good people.
I think you sound almost like Zelensky. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, was interviewed by Fareed Zakaria. And Zakaria said, how can you stay optimistic in the face of such evil? And Zelensky said, because I believe in people. I believe in my people, and I believe in the people of the world. So I think you've nailed that faith in human nature. Bill George, the head of leadership at Harvard, I interviewed him and said, what makes you optimistic? And he said, being surrounded by positive people. What a blessing. So it sounds like you're making very good choices there. So thinking about that, I mean, you're a leader of in politics, you're deputy leader of the party, but thinking about your upbringing, and you've gone from snowy river country. I think you were born in Mansfield.
I was, yeah.
You moved to Western Australia, which in anyone's terms in the world is frontier country. So who have been the leaders and the bosses, the positive people, men and women, who've inspired you?
Wow. Okay. So I think there's two ends to this, Victor. I think I've had some good bosses, particularly a couple of guys. When I was at university at the University of Queensland many years ago, and I was working to put myself through, and I worked at a place called the Council Club, free plug, and was just a general dog's body, barman, pickup, whatever else. Had some very good bosses there, Neil and Dennis, and taught me a lot about, because that had a very mobile staff, like staff would come and go. So it was very good to pick up some good tips on how to work with people and encourage them along the way. So that was great. I have to say, though, I'm probably more influenced by the bad bosses that I've had than the good ones. 'Cause I've had lots of really terrible examples of how to run a business. And in fact, so my first full-time job involved terrible bosses. And that's why when I set up 18 months after that, my own business, then all of the things that you see other people do very badly, you get determined not to do. Now, it's a bit like parents, Victor. The smart people look at their parents and they go, they weren't terrible, they weren't perfect. I'm gonna take the really good bits that they did, and I'm going to leave behind the bits that I thought weren't very good. And I think bosses is very much like that. Unfortunately, in Australia, we don't often have a great culture. You've got to work to find the optimists and the good bosses. So when you find them, that's fantastic. But you can learn from the bad ones as well. So when I started the business back in 1991, my first business, I was just determined to do all the things that my boss previously didn't do. Treat staff with respect, treat clients well, be firm, but be friendly and positive as a part of the process. So I really did learn a lot from a whole pile of bad bosses. Now, and the same applies in politics. I've had some good leaders, but I've also had some terrible leaders, and the things you learn from the terrible leaders are probably even more important than the ones you learn from the good one. As long as you can not be bitter and twisted about it, as long as you can take it and learn from it and go, I'm not going to do that, therefore I'm going to do these things in a different way. That was absolutely critical for my development. Now, whether it was in business, sort of in early leadership roles, in volunteer roles, etc., and then ultimately in politics, learn how not to do it badly. I think it's just one of those wonderful tools that you can get.
I am one of the leaders in engineering in Australia. A friend of mine said, "Never mistake leadership for perfection."
Yeah.
So I think you know that. Now, look, Liberal Party.
Yep.
I've got to confess, I was a member of Parliament for 18 years for the Liberal Party, and so my question to you is, what does the modern Liberal Party stand for? So Menzies, said, look, we're a progressive party, not reactionary. We believe in the individual, their rights and their enterprise. My favourite book on liberalism was by Hobhouse, who said, the heart of liberalism is the liberation, so a bit like Menzies, liberation of living spiritual energy. So what's modern 2020s liberalism to you?
Wow. So that is a really good question. And I wish every Liberal should sit down and think about this, because I go to meetings and sometimes people will ask an MP, what does it mean to be a Liberal? And there's nothing worse than watching a Liberal MP in particular not being able to answer it. And perhaps it's a little bit different for everybody. So I'm going to run you through, Victor, what I believe being a Liberal is. And I think we often forget. So I think we've sort of forgotten what being a Liberal actually stands for. Now, just before I do, let me say I'm, in terms of economics, I'm a bit arch conservative. So, but that's arch conservatism is not actually what the Liberal Party stands for. So I describe, and you've got to look at all the politics, your side, their side, and let me say I have some good friends on the dark side in the Labor Party, because I think that one of the secrets of politics is to find the good people wherever they are. You don't have to agree with them to respect them. I've got lots of friends who are frequently wrong. So I think but you learn from that as well. Like, that's how you learn. So here is my view of what's sort of gone wrong with the Liberal Party and what I think conservatism is. And I think we've forgotten it from the heroes of the Liberal Party. So I'll put this as very simply. My personal belief on the sides of politics, left wing versus right wing, is as simple as this. I believe that if you're right wing, you believe in individual reward. That is, if you gamble on starting a business, then you should reap the majority of the rewards of that. If you invest in something, if you attempt to do something, then you should be recognized and rewarded for that. If you're out on the left wing, all the way out to communism, you believe in communal reward. So if somebody like me goes out and starts a business, the rewards of that business should be shared equally with everybody in the community. I think one of the basics of liberalism and conservative politics is individual reward. But at the same time, it's also individual responsibility, which we're also differ on. So if your life doesn't end up where you wanted it to be, if you make bad decisions, if you commit crimes, if you become a drug addict, if you do all of those things, if you're a Liberal, in my view, basically you believe in individual responsibility. You, the perpetrator, you, the person, are responsible for the situation in which you find yourself. Now, if you're out in the left wing, you believe that, again, that's communal responsibility. Everybody's at fault. And I think that's the basic difference between right wing and left wing, and therefore the basic difference between the Liberal Party and all the other parties, basically. And I think we've forgotten that, because if you look in history, Victor, at our greatest statesmen, the people that really impacted upon me in particular in terms of what they did in politics. Now, I'm too young to remember Menzies, but, we talk about sort of Menzies, forgotten people. Menzies focused on aspirational people. And I'm going to use that word a lot because I think optimism and positivity comes partly from aspiration. Because if you have no aspiration, then you don't have to achieve anything, but you're probably not very happy with yourself. Aspirational people are the group of people that we should talk to, that naturally fit within the Liberal Party philosophy. So Menzies had his forgotten people. They were the aspirational people, the people that wanted to buy a home, start a business, or rise up the chain in terms of their employment. They wanted to get ahead, and Menzies spoke to them. Now, jump forward a couple of decades. The next great leader, John Howard, probably they called them Howard's battlers, and Howard's battlers weren't the people who were unemployed or unemployable. Some of them were unemployed, but they were still aspirational. They wanted to get into the workforce. It wasn't the group of people that naturally appeals to the Labor Party, where they're looking for handouts. Howard's battlers were the aspirational group, the people that, again, wanted to get ahead, start a business, rise up the chain, start a family, own a home. That aspirational group was the same, whether it was Menzies or Howard. But we've kind of forgotten that in this new version of politics. And I want to see the Liberal Party go back to appealing to aspirational people who believe in individual responsibility and individual reward. That's the group of people that we know, and we haven't been speaking to them. We haven't reached out to them. We've tried to be all things to all people. We've changed the way politics works, but I want to see us reach out to aspirational people, because, like me, they're the optimists. They're the people that will actually take the country forward. They're the people that want to get ahead. And it's that group we have to reach out to. But we haven't really done a good job at that. Now, the other thing I say is that people in their lifetime, in my view, shift through the political spectrum a bit. And I've said this in Parliament, and it's not my saying, so I'm actually stealing it, Victor. But I'm a firm believer in the old adage that if you're not a little bit left-wing when you're young, you don't have a heart. And if you're not a little bit right-wing when you're older, you don't have a brain. And the balance and the compromise is absolutely critical. So my daughters are a prime example. I've got 4 daughters between 18 and 28. And they all start a little bit left-wing. They're ideological. Funnily enough, that's probably rubbed off a bit. And that's okay. And we need to be able to talk as a Liberal Party to that young group of people who are interested in things like climate change and saving the planet, etc. And we need to be able to have a conversation with them. We won't always agree, but we've been terrible at talking to that group of people. Unfortunately, the Liberal Party's been very good at saying, you're just wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot. And we haven't had a conversation with them about what matters to them. And that's not to say that I think we'll suddenly swing a whole pile of 18 to 30-year-old votes our way. But I tell you what, somewhere around 30, most people with ambition are starting to move into that next stage of life. They're looking at long-term relationships, children, raising a family, starting a business, running a business, or climbing up the work ladder. And they're absolutely looking at home ownership. And they become aspirational. And if we can talk to them in the early years and say, when you're ready to become aspirational, you come and talk to us. Then all of this doom and gloom about everybody's abandoning the Liberal Party will become nonsense, because that group is still there. I mean, human nature still applies. That's the group that will come to us if we can demonstrate that that's still what we stand for. And to be honest, probably for the last 20 years or so, we haven't done that, or we've done it very poorly. That's the group that we need to look at.
Yeah, it's interesting. I asked Richard Alston, who was a minister in the Howard government, but who was president of the Victorian Liberal Party when Dick Hamer was premier. Yep. Garfield Barwick was the first chairman of the Australian Conservation Foundation. Malcolm Fraser was on his board. The first Australian EPA was set up by a Liberal government. And I said to Richard, how has that been lost? With circular economy, for instance, is the ultimate expression of capitalism, not socialism. How has the Liberal Party lost that? And it's a great relief to hear you talking about listening and talking to those young people about the desire to be environmentally responsible, and yet at the same time participate in the free economy and own their own homes.
Yeah, absolutely, Victor. And I don't believe they're mutually exclusive at all. But you're absolutely right. Now, in Western Australia, we've had a few very good leaders, probably none more so than a guy called Sir Charles Court.
Yeah.
And Charlie Court, and I knew Charles, he's an excellent fellow, probably one of the first great environmentalists. You know, we never like to see too much name dropping here, but I can tell you that on the side, one of his great advisors in environmental circles was a guy called Harry Butler, who went on to probably more national fame than Sir Charles did. But they did great things. So the first big expansion of the reserve system in Western Australia was done under a Liberal government under Sir Charles Court. And so Sir Charles Court was an environmentalist who also believed in development. I can tell you because I've also used him as an advisor. He's passed away now, but Harry Butler, they're both gone. But Harry Butler was also a great advisor and a great believer in the potential to develop and preserve at the same time. So you can absolutely do that. And Liberal governments have done that in the past. We're just dreadful at talking about it.
Yeah.
For some reason, there's a group in the Liberal Party who just want to believe that the word environmental is evil, and that we need to be opposed to using it and talking about it in any way, shape, or form. I've got to say, I've been to a lot of Liberal meetings over many decades, Victor, and you know, every leader that came over here in the last 20 years from the Federal Party always said in their annual speech, yes, climate change is important and we need to do things about it. Here's some of the things we're doing. And funnily enough, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party took almost exactly the same climate change and environment policies to the last election. But no one ever talked about the Liberal Party one because we couldn't display the sort of discipline to get behind that message because of the group of people who are far more interested in just going, anything environmental is evil. All we believe about is economic growth. Now, Sir Charles Court, and I believe John Howard ultimately realised that you don't have economic growth without environmental preservation, and we just have to be smart about it. And there's all this positive stuff happening, you know, in terms of technology, in terms of changes, and Western Australia partly led the way. So Charles Court instigated some widespread land clearing bans in places in Western Australia where the traditionalists probably would have strung him up if they could have got hold of him. So Sir Charles Court was one of the first people back in the 60s and 70s saying, we can't just clear all the time. We actually have to have an environmental focus here. And that means some areas, land clearings are negative, not a positive. And he led the way with that. There's this great history in the party of positive environmental outcomes. If we could only talk about that instead of internal divisions based on whether, you know, climate change exists or not. I'm a climate change believer. I think it's critically important, Victor. And what I guess I'll give you my very brief version of why climate change is important. Climate change is important because as the climate changes, for the first time, there are a couple of significant impacts that humans give. The climate has shifted before. I mean, oceans have been 100 meters higher and lower. Temperatures have been 8 degrees higher and lower. It has shifted before. So why is it critically important now? It's for two reasons. For the first time, we're changing the speed of change at a point which makes it very difficult for the ecology to adapt. Ecologies will adapt. I mean, that's why the tundra was once a rainforest. The Sahara was once a rainforest. Those ecosystems will move, but you've got to give them time to. The second most important reason is there are so many humans on the planet now, there's almost nowhere for environments to adapt to. So if a major forest needed to shift, there's a population that gets in the way. So that's why it's important. That's why we need to manage the process, and that's why we need to act. But
Western Australia, I guess, is well placed. I mean, you've got, you know, twiggy forest working on green hydrogen. You've got a mining sector that knows that it needs a social license to operate everywhere from Western Australia to Rwanda and the Congo. So I think when you talk about sustainable enterprises beyond mining, in fact, you've actually got the industry that's probably leading the way.
Yeah, we're doing okay. We have to do it in a really practical way that, you know, keeps the lights on for people, keeps the air conditioners on for people. You've got to be careful about being bogged down in the ideology. So, you know, the problem is that the bits of the debate that get into the media and get covered are either the two extremes. You know, either we're about to drown because the oceans are going up 100 meters tomorrow, or it doesn't exist at all. And that's the bit that gets coverage in the debate. So we need to make sure we have really sensible, practical responses as we transition, and it has to work. We can't be ideological. We absolutely have to be practical, and we will get there. I'm absolutely certain we'll get there. We probably won't get there in the time frame that's currently proposed here, and massive change in the next 7 years or 6 years. We probably won't deliver that because it's not practical. But certainly, Bob, if we look at carbon neutral by 2050, I'm an optimist that both Australia and Western Australia will be pretty damn close over that time period. And I think that's a good thing for the planet. I'm not convinced that the whole planet will come with us, but whether they do or they don't, I think our economy will adjust to that. And Western Australia is right at the forefront of many of those things.
Well, I think you're at the forefront of leadership, and there's just such a genuineness about you, and that infectious optimism that the Australian people are looking for. You've been utterly generous with your time. Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you'd like to communicate?
Well, there's probably 1,000 things you haven't asked me, Victor, but in politics, I've learned that one of the best things you can do is not go out too far. So, no, I would say to the people of Australia, particularly Western Australia, we're doing it very well here, but the future looks pretty good in Australia. And that's not to say there aren't threats on the horizon, but, if you start to think that the future looks okay, then you can start to relax a little bit more and treat the people around you with that little bit more respect. It's not always sheep stations that we're playing for. Let's boost each other up rather than tear each other down. And if we could just get that as a part of the focus, that would be a major step towards leading into the future for this country, which still is the best place in the world to live.
Utterly brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and best wishes with infecting the Liberal Party nationally and internationally with optimism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor.
We hope you enjoyed that Optimism Cafe at the Centre for Optimism. We'd love you to get involved. You can see the website there, centreforoptimism.com. There's lots of materials on the website. And you'd, of course, be welcome to join the centre too.